Welcome to this week's Quick Charge. When God's people needed to know God's way for their lives and for their future, they discovered that they had to be shown the way. And it was the ark of God's presence that led the way for them. God instructed them to walk directly behind the ark. God's abiding presence is crucial to you and I finding our way in life. One of the reasons why is because that's where His grace is. You know, the ark is always called the ark of His presence, not the ark of His power or the ark of His provision. The way for me is always in His presence, and that's where the grace is. God's presence is what sustains me, and that's His grace. His presence is who He is. His power and His provision is what He is. It's being with Him, not just getting from Him or doing for Him. In Mark 3:14, the Bible says Jesus called the 12 men that He wanted to, quote, be with Him. I will never be sustained by a miracle alone or by any measure of help. I can encounter His power and His help and still not be affected, not be kept, if you will. Those things don't sustain me, and they won't keep me in the way. The Red Sea was an incredible demonstration of God's power, but it could not sustain them. It could not keep them in the way to their future. The disciples witnessed miracles in the streets that shook villages and stirred towns and even moved entire cities, yet none of those miracles kept them in the end. The Bible says they all forsook Him. People genuinely seek God for help and for healing, whether in church or out of church, at an altar, looking for some sort of remedy. And after it comes, they often no longer seek Him or serve Him. Remember the 10 lepers? Only one returned to thank Jesus, to which Jesus replied, "Where are the other 9? The feeding of the 5,000 was an awesome demonstration of the help of Jesus, and the Bible says they were all filled. But Jesus turned to the crowd and He said, "You're following me because I gave you something." And by the end of that very same chapter, the Bible says they had all left Him and they walked with Him no more. At the wedding feast in Cana, Jesus provided the best wine that money could buy, but the guests were not moved to love Him or serve Him because of that. Just because God miraculously supplies for me or pays one of my bills, it doesn't follow that that act of provision will sustain me. Jesus has paid everyone's debt, but that doesn't guarantee that everyone has a Christ-centered life. Moses on Mount Sinai went 40 days without food or water. He was sustained by God's presence without any personal miracles, with no expression of power or provision. Mary and Martha were both in the same house. The Bible says, but Mary chose the better part, which was being with Him in His presence. Being in His presence is the key to finding God's way for my life. This is why my relationship with God's presence is most vulnerable and it is most susceptible to decay. An Old Testament king by the name of Rehoboam, he gave over the valuable, precious shields of gold during an attack, and he never restored them. He just substituted them with something less valuable. But there is no substitute for being with Him. To know and find God's way, you must choose to be presence-centered, presence-focused, and presence-oriented. Because in being with Him, you'll find the grace to go His way. Join me next week for more of Which Way. God bless.